Hey there, I'm the Accidental Monster.
And I'm eternally mortal.
And this is the Hidden Egg Podcast where we talk about vulnerability
And stuff.
and things. Clickety, clickety, clickety. There.
Welcome back. Thank you for coming back. We're so glad to have you here.
Oh, right. And so this week's stuff and things.
The comments from last week's episode, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
I'm a little tired.
No worries. This is our awesome podcast. But the first comment that I got on my list here is from Dennis Gorbanoff. Thank you very much.
He pointed out this is our 13th episode, or that was our 13th episode, and now we're on our 14th episode. That's a lot. That's a lot of episodes.
Called us out for being productive. Called us out for productivity, and that's thanks. We appreciate that.
RC Hammond, thanks for the mention.
Thanks, RC. And then we had Carrie, who was excited to get to it, commenting before even listening. Thank you, Carrie. You're such a sweetie.
Yeah, and she doesn't say this in the comment, but I saw one of her articles recently. She finally got an apartment. That's been what she's been kind of life getting away from her, is that she's been trying to get into this apartment for like, I don't know, I want to say 2 months, but maybe that's just me being ridiculous. But it's been a while, and it seems like that's coming to an end now with a happy ending, and I'm really happy for Carrie.
That's awesome, Carrie. We're so stoked. I hope it continues to bring you smiles.
And then Sieran with another epic comment, which really helped. Like I loved his world, his autistic world imagining.
Yeah, because a lot of the comment had to do with in the last episode, Tam mentioned what it would look how uncomfortable it might be for neurotypical people if the world was designed by and for autistic people, and Sieran gave us a little peek at his idea of what a world by and for autistic people would look like, and it was very good. I actually am kind of inspired to potentially see if I can get a lot of answers to that question. What would the world look like if it was tailored towards your comfort specifically in any individual? I think that might be a really interesting, like, huge art project, but I don't know if I'm actually going to remember to do anything like that. But Sieran, thanks for the comment as always.
Hey, on that note, if anybody listening wants to write in, I will leave a link to one of kind of my commenting email, because I would love to collect those and then maybe do an episode about the different things. Let me know if we can use your name, whatever name you send with it, but or if you want to be anonymous, let us know that too. But I would really love to collect those, and
that'd be super interesting.
Kind of build a world that's just tailored for everybody.
Right. And no pressure, of course. If you're interested, awesome. If not, no big. We appreciate you either way.
And then we've got You Good. And she kind of gave a little bit of insight on complaining a little bit, that maybe because last week's episode was about complaining, that maybe it's a confidence issue. Maybe complaining happens for validation, and I don't know if it always does, but I know that there are some moments when I complain that, like she said, because I question my own intentions and I want somebody to tell me whether I'm right or wrong for feeling the way I feel.
I think that for some people, a lot of the complaining that they do is for validation. I think that there are people that complain for other reasons as well, but because I've seen people that you can justify them to their faces while they're complaining, and they don't give a fuck what you say. They just keep going. It doesn't matter. But yeah, I think that it is something like that. And thank you, Good, for sharing your perspective on the situation as well. We appreciate that so much.
All right. So we're also in the Discord channel thingy, which some of our listeners may be listening to this on Spotify and don't know that there's a Discord. So I will put that into the description if anybody's interested in the future. Because technically you could be listening to us live. Yay!
Yeah, if you wanted to. I don't know why, but if you wanted to, you're more than welcome to. Absolutely.
Well, the why is because we have a chat thingy that people could text us things while we're talking.
Yep, that's true. Also, we do kind of, flip it on a few minutes before we get started, so you can listen to some behind the scenes crap if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Oh, and we may start doing pausing when we have to pee in the middle of the episode.
yeah, piss break might be a thing, might become a thing.
And so that might be something that the people in the voice channel get to experience because
Right.
we can't pause live.
Not like the piss itself, just the
No.
break while we go to another room to do that.
Yeah, the computer's not in the bathroom, so
Amazingly.
yeah.
I know it's an odd decorating choice, but anyway.
Anyway, so this week we're talking about abuse.
Yes. This week we are talking about abuse, and we do not have notes.
No notes, but abuse is like the big one for
Yeah.
me.
Uh-huh.
I feel like for vulnerability, it is the big one also because it's the reason why people aren't naturally vulnerable because
Right.
we are naturally vulnerable when we're born, and abusive behaviors, not necessarily that the people using them were abusers, but abusive behaviors little by little like teaches us to not be so vulnerable anymore.
Right. Absolutely. It sort of beats us into not being vulnerable anymore.
Yeah.
And from certain perspectives, i.e., like toxic masculinity perspectives, like it beats the weak out of you. Like they want to. A lot of dudes in the 80s and 90s kind of wanted to be abused so they'd be tougher. It's
Yeah.
real sad.
Yep.
I don't like that shit. Makes me unhappy.
And let's be clear. This is not the same as the like sexual kink of sadomasochism, BDSM. You do you, man, if that's what you're into. I don't know if psychologically it's linked in some way, but it's consenting, and that's all that matters. Abuse in the real world isn't consenting. Nobody consents to being shit on. Nobody like
You just there's no sentences you can put there
no,
that
there's
will
no
actually, because like somebody's
outside
consenting
of a
to it.
sexual thing. Nobody really asks to be insulted or put down as a general rule.
Even that is a little bit, but the point is that like people abuse people without consent. If you anything that two consenting adults do with each other, I don't care. Have
Well,
fun.
the BDSM is between two people who have, they're building their own intimacy, and they can be building it through those insults. That is a thing that happens. But when somebody insults them that isn't part of that pair or whatever, if they have multiple partners, it's not a part of their nesting group or whatever, it's not okay.
Right.
And that, that's kind of where we're looking is that range of not okay.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Abuse.
Off to a great start.
I know, we're doing fantastic. We just need to figure out how to start. Well, okay, so.
Oh, have we not started? We're already starting, really.
Yeah, we just got to start walking in a direction, I mean.
Oh, well, I mean, there's so many different kinds of abuse. There's so many different, because, like, there's like what you think of as traditional physical abuse.
Right.
And then there's, from what I've gathered, emotional abuse and psychological abuse are two different kinds of mental abuse.
Okay, but I can accept that. That's just definitions, though.
Well, psychological abuse is different in the fact that it doesn't use your emotions. It kind of skews your sense of right and wrong. So like, what was it? Somebody like I read somewhere that they like gave examples. So like if you get burned with a cigarette, like every time you fart, that is psychologically abusing, because it forms a different view of what's right and wrong. Like the scale of what you're punished with versus what you've done becomes imbalanced in a way that your brain struggles to cope with. It's not an emotional thing. You're not, like, I mean, there's probably emotions in there,
Mm-hmm.
but it's more that it's skewing your brain's ability to process normally.
Right.
Because this doesn't, your brain's just like, this doesn't seem right, but your brain doesn't do that when you're in an abusive situation, because it adapts. So it doesn't realize that it's not right. It's just adapting to the scenario.
Right. You're getting multiple stimulus that is teaching you something that is not going to be true outside of that situation that's teaching you that.
Right.
And so when and if hopefully you get rescued from that horrible situation, your brain is going to take a while rewriting so that you don't think that every time you fart you're just expecting to get burned by a cigarette.
Right. Whereas emotional abuse is more like a guilt trip. That would be an emotional abuse.
Right. Emotional abuse is, if you don't do what I want, then you're a bad friend and I'm going to hurt myself.
Right. Right.
So, belated trigger warning in just about every capacity, possibly. I
Yeah,
think
that's
part of the
fair.
reason
That's
why
fair.
I'm a little nervous about talking about this is because of all the potential triggers that exist in here. Because so many people have been abused. So many people have abused others. And talking about it pulls up that pain.
Yeah.
Whether you have been abused or abused others. Likely you've done both.
Yeah, I haven't even said the two hardest abuse categories.
Right. SA?
What? Oh, that and children, child abuse.
Child abuse. Yeah. And
If you
those
don't know
are
what
rough.
SA means, it's sexual abuse, just for reference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those two are especially difficult. Not to say that any abuse is easy. They're all difficult. But when you mingle, when you make sex into the abuse, it becomes something different. And if children are involved with any of the three, it becomes something like, I mean, if you're listening, you're probably already just like, ugh, like you feel it itching all over your skin thinking about children being in an abusive situation. It's just bad. Nobody likes that.
Of course. Although, depending on your age, every child in the 60s and 70s was probably being spanked on a regular basis or slapped when they did something wrong. The whole children should be seen and not heard sort of thing. Like, children's autonomy has actually come a long way in the past couple of decades. And there's a lot of parents that are still upset about that, saying, like, we should still have the ability to control our kids and only expose them to what we want to expose them to.
There are still, I believe there's still 12 states where hitting your kid is still legal. It's not considered child abuse.
Right, exactly. And there may be people listening to this podcast that are like, sometimes you got to hit your kid. That's how kids learn. And if that's your perspective, I'm not going to try and change your mind. But
I will.
please
Science has
know, I do
other
not disagree. I do
plans.
not agree.
Science says that children who are spanked grow up to be, they have a lower IQ, they have a lower EQ, which is emotional intelligence, and not only do they have more violent tendencies, but they also fail, because of their lower EQ, they fail to fully express themselves. They have less satisfying lives, and they're more likely to have mental illnesses. There is no reason we can't teach our kids with words and intelligence instead of with our fists.
Right.
Or an open hand. If you're going to make that argument, open hands aren't better.
No, it's not.
Because the people that love you shouldn't be the ones bringing you pain.
Well,
on purpose.
To love is to invite pain, as we've talked about on this podcast before. If you love someone, that's really allowing so that someone to, like, if they hurt, you're going to hurt too. There's a pain that's associated.
Yeah,
with,
but you
with
don't
love.
mean to hurt people
But not
in that
like
sense.
smacking
It's
people.
not a thing you do out of anger or some sense of justice because you farted,
It's
know,
not
or
intentional
something.
pain, right?
Yeah, it's the intentional part that makes it wrong. And I just don't think that hitting your kid is necessary. I think that people in general are smart enough that you can reason with them in other ways. And if you're talking about a child that's young enough that can't be reasoned with, I don't think that hitting them is really the best idea either, because a 2-year-old is just going to keep doing 2-year-old things.
Yeah.
And it should be okay for them to do those things. You put them in an environment where they can do the things that they do safely. That's part of being a parent.
Right. Absolutely. And even a 2-year-old is still an autonomous, separate human being. Sure, they need you for everything. Everything. But that's a whole separate person. Actually and truly. Anyway, so instead of saying things about science and potentially bringing on quote unquote intellectual scientific debate about something that shouldn't be debated from our perspective at least.
I'm sorry.
Why don't
Maybe.
No. I wasn't trying to dog you for saying that or judge you for saying that. I was thinking about it. I'm super uncomfortable even just talking about this. So I was thinking, what if, like I've been trying to push for us for this podcast a lot, we share our own vulnerabilities about abuse. Maybe just our stories about how we've been abused in certain ways in the past.
Okay.
It's one of those things that's going to be still a little difficult because, like, everyone's perception is different. And so when I talk about the ways that I feel like I've been abused, other people may not think that that's abuse. And that's valid. You can believe however you want. We all have different perspectives, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I will share with you what I feel about my experiences. And Tam, you can do the same if you wish.
Well, I have that whole autistic thing of, words have meanings and definitions, and abuse is abuse. Like, if it is under the defined umbrella of what abuse is, then it is abuse, and if it's not, then it's not abuse.
Yeah. I just know a lot of people that have fought based solely around trying to determine what their personal definitions of abuse are. One person has one definition, one person has another, and then they just fight endlessly about what is abuse and what isn't.
I have found theHotline.org to be a fantastic resource of definitions, because they have several different types of abuse defined. Because there's financial abuse. Did you know?
Sure.
Financial abuse is a type of abuse too.
Yeah.
I didn't add that in. There's a lot of different kinds of abuse, and they are really good at defining what those look like, what they would look like from the outside and from the inside sometimes, and different. I don't know. I remember the first time I went there, and I was like, holy crap! I didn't even know all these things were abuse. I thought they were normal, because that was my experience.
Right.
So yeah, listener, thehotline.org. I don't feel like I need to spell that out, right?
I am going to recommend putting that and a few other things into the article, actually.
Oh, so I should probably write that stuff down then.
Maybe I can put it on my phone notepad, or do you have something?
I have stuff.
I don't mean to give you homework though with the article. I feel bad now, but we're talking about abuse.
Yeah, it's a big one.
You know what a really important thing I think to mention is?
What?
That there are abuse hotlines and websites if you are in a situation where you don't feel like you can escape, where you're
Well, that's what
trapped.
the hotline.org does. That is for America anyway. For the United States, the hotline.org is our national abuse hotline. They have a phone number, they have a website, they even have the ability, it sounds like a commercial, but they even have the ability to, if you are in a position where you are unsafe, they have a button on the site that you can push that'll leave this website and go someplace else and erase its own history. so that if you're in a situation where your phone history isn't even safe, it will protect you.
Good.
I think.
Sure. Yeah. The features are unimportant, but like us making sure we put something.
Be in an abusive situation and then tell me that
That's
those
not
are
what I
unimportant.
meant by my statement, but I know what you mean. Absolutely, it's a wonderful feature on the website, and I think that it's great that they're doing that. But us posting resources for people that are being abused that can't get out of it, I think is the best, absolute best thing we can do with this, because there are people out there that are being abused right now that do not have an out from their perspective. They just have to survive with it for the rest of their lives from their perspective, and it's tragic. I hate that, because I wish we could all just be nicer to each other and stop abusing if we could. Anyway, so yeah, maybe there's got to be some sort of like international um, resource as well that has listed for all of the countries that have that kind of support network set up. I'm sure that there's countries that don't have that support network set up, and that's fucking tragic too. I'm mumbling again. Damn it. Um,
Yeah. It's a heavy one. Like, no matter where we go with the idea of abuse, it becomes extreme. It becomes heavy. It becomes hard.
Because the problem, a lot of times, the problem with abuse is that it's long-term relationships. You're not usually abused by some asshole you met at the bar, unless he punches you.
I mean, you are, but you don't feel like it's a problem because you can just not talk to that guy again.
Right. You don't have to care about what that person thinks, typically. And sometimes, some people have a hard time. I can't do that. Like, some people have a hard time with letting go of things said to them. Certainly, that happens a lot too. But, I mean, a lot of the horror stories of abuse are bosses that abuse their employees for a decade, that are partners that
Right.
abuse their partner for decades, or their partner and their kids for decades, or all kinds of stuff like that's just very long term. It's just very, very much one of the most horrible examples of someone stealing the autonomy of others.
Well, are we going to do our personal stories or did you want to take a break?
Um, we are at about the halfway point. I don't have to pee though.
I don't either.
So let's just
Keep
not
going.
worry about it for now. Let's go into
Sure.
personal stories. Do you have a personal story to share to begin with?
I do. When I was thinking about the podcast last night, trying to go to sleep, because as you do, um, I was actually thinking about how, like, I was thinking about what instances I have had of physical abuse. And one of the most horrific ones, I haven't had a whole lot of physical abuse in my life. So, first and foremost, that has not been a big thing for me. Most of my abuses have been psychological or, well, most of them are really emotional.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one, and I feel a little bad about saying it because it involves my stepdad.
I mean,
But like, so I don't bear him any ill will, but he was going through a really emotional part of his life and was really angry during this period of time, and I don't know what was going on. I was like maybe 10 or 11. There's no way I had any idea of what the hell was going on. But it was the one and only time he spanked me.
mm.
And my mom had been, she raised me with spanking my whole life, and we already went through how I feel about spanking. But when he did it, and I remember, so it was me and my step sisters, and we were all sleeping in the same bedroom. One of my stepsisters and I, we slept in the same bed, and we were just giggling. It was like a Friday or Saturday night or whatever, and we just were not going to bed. We were just giggling, and I think one of them was like farting or something, and it was just funny. And I think at some point, like the adults kept telling us to go to sleep, and they were getting more and more angry. And one of my stepsisters, I think, said something snarky, but I don't remember like what it was. And I could be making that up. Maybe she didn't. But it was so like her if she did. And after that, because I feel like that's what was the trigger to it. And he came in and started smacking everybody's butts, and I don't remember, like, I have vivid memory of being like a little kid giggling with the sheets pulled up to my neck, just, trying really hard to go to sleep despite the fact that we were all just giggling about whatever. And then suddenly I was on the reverse side with my face kind of, pressed into the pillow, and him smacking my butt. And it was unlike any feeling I had ever felt. It hurt my bones through my entire body, despite the fact that he was only smacking my butt, which was the appropriate, quote unquote, place to spank your child. I felt it everywhere. I felt it in my brain. It hurt everywhere. It did not feel like spanking. It felt like he was beating me. Even though it was the same action as what my mom did, it was like all of his rage went through his arm. And I was a kid. I was a little girl. And he was a grown ass man.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember if it waited until I talked to my grandma or if I actually was able to talk to my mom the next day, but whatever the case, I basically was like, if I need to be spanked, it should be you. And I was really concerned about, like, I felt really bad, the survivor's guilt kind of thing, because it didn't save my stepsisters from that.
No.
And I didn't know what else to do, you know? Like, part of me was like, I want them to not have to go through this either. This isn't, what's the word? What's the word when they punish? It's not punishment. It just felt cruel.
Mm.
I'm like, I don't bear him any ill will. He stopped. He never laid a hand on me again. He dealt with his anger issues and, all that. But I could see from that moment, if that were my experience every single time I did something wrong, that would be horrifying. That is the experience I pull from when I think about people who go through abuse.
Yeah.
And I know for me it was just the once, and super lucky that I never had to deal with that again. I was spanked by my mom before and after that.
Sure.
So it wasn't like I wasn't spanked at all ever. But that was a unique experience with spanking that I had never experienced before and never have again.
Yeah, I understand. I'm glad you didn't have to experience more than that.
Right.
Well, it sucks that you had to experience it in the first place. Yeah. I don't even know what I can talk about.
Well, you went on the other side of abuse, into that shadowy realm that people often ignore because it is neglect.
I know. I was actually thinking about neglect. Like, how do I
How do you show
give
something that
an
isn't there?
anecdote about that? Like, the closest I could come up with was that there was a time when I was somewhere between like 7 and 11 years old, and my parents played the card game Bridge in like a league. I don't know how that shit happened in the goddamn 80s, but like in the 80s or 90s, they were in a bridge league where other couples typically would come over and play bridge with my parents, and my mom and dad were on a team, and then the other two people were on a team. And since it was moderately middle class white folk, a lot of them had kids too, and so their kids would come over, and I would have a friend for like 4 or 5 hours while they played bridge.
But this was in the 80s. You weren't even 10, right?
I don't remember if it was the 80s or 90s. I just said a random decade.
Okay.
One of those kids, I don't remember the name of, wanted to see bits of the house. And so, like, walked him around and showed him shit. And my parents had this old hot tub in the basement. It was real creepy for me as a kid. That didn't work, and he wanted to turn it on, which was impossible. I didn't know anything about it, but he wanted to like go start flipping switches, and I'm like, no, what are you doing? No, the obvious monsters that live here are gonna kill us. Why are you doing this? And my parents also had this like old uh, Cadillac, not like a classic Cadillac, because my dad doesn't have classic cars. He just has older cars that he likes to keep moving. And so there was this white Cadillac that we had that we occasionally drove every once in a while. And this kid found out about it. I don't know, maybe I said something about it. I have no idea. He decided that we should take it and drive. I'm pretty sure I was less than 10 years old.
I mean, it's pretty clear that that kid was abused in
No,
some
no,
way.
yeah. I'm getting to why this is neglect. Because, like, it was me that stopped that from happening at the same age as this kid. It was my responsibility that decided that wasn't going to happen, because I could have very easily gotten the keys and gotten in that car and drove away at any time. I knew how to do all of these things, and my parents probably would not have noticed. And that's the only way I can explain the neglect, because like I was with a stranger and I could have done just about anything. And the reason for that, from, protecting my parents' perspective, is that they never really needed to pay that much attention to me. I never really required a lot of extra attention. The only time that I required extra attention was at the dinner table, because I was picky and didn't like certain foods. And so they would just make me sit at the kitchen table until they got bored with watching me not eat and said I could go to bed.
I have to disagree with you there. I think you did need the extra attention. You just didn't know how to demand it. You weren't demanding that extra attention. And that's not the same as not needing it. That's just, you know, you not knowing how to ask for it. Just because you don't know that you need it doesn't mean that you didn't need it.
I mean, sure, but like I had no idea how to be aware of it or to ask for it and everything like that, and it probably messed up, my ability to help raise the kid that I've helped raise also in certain moments. But I don't know how to describe it. It's difficult to figure out, because like my parents hung out with me like friends would. Like dad wanted to do certain things with me, like show me stuff on the computer or work out or like do stuff around the house to make the house better. And I don't remember doing anything with mom as a kid except for like watching shows occasionally. Um,
And
but
that's the difficulty with certain kinds of like neglect in general as an abuse, is that it's difficult to pinpoint, especially for the people that have been abused, because abusive victims, um, they normalize the abuse. And when it's neglect, it's an absence of something. And so you've normalized an absence of something as if that something doesn't need to exist.
basically, yeah.
And so how do you identify this thing that you've already decided doesn't need to exist?
Right.
It doesn't need to exist. So there's no void in you to notice for yourself. It's only when somebody looking at you sees that there's this void where, like, I don't have that void, but you do. And you're just coping with it, like, it's like not having a pinky toe. You've adapted to not having a pinky toe to the point where it doesn't really feel like you needed one to begin with, and you don't even notice that you were supposed to have a pinky toe. But then I come along and I'm like, I have a pinky toe. You're supposed to have a pinky toe. Why don't you have one? It's kind of.
Judgmental. I'm just joking.
Well, I mean, I
I'm
accept
just
that you don't
joking.
have a pinky toe, but there's something that made it to where you didn't have one. You
Right.
know?
I do have my pinky toes.
Yeah, we do have pinky toes. I was using a
Oh,
metaphor
I'm
to
sorry. I'm just
help.
being silly with it.
Well, but neglect is just, it's difficult.
It
What
is.
I remember of your stories, that the only thing I can think of right now is when you had told me that your parents didn't really feel like any of your relationships were real. Like they just kind of poo-pooed all of your relationships as being inconsequential, puppy love. They didn't.
Crushes. I barely had any relationships to speak of.
Okay, fine, whatever. Your feelings.
Yeah.
Your feelings were minimized.
Well, what I mean by that is that, like, I'm gonna have a struggle to not accidentally mention names here, but my first post-pubescent girlfriend, when I was 14 and a freshman in high school, once we became officially boyfriend-girlfriend, my mom specifically, was all about, giving us rides wherever we wanted. We could hang out. We made out in my basement, like, and that probably was not cool to just leave pubescent 14-year-olds to just go into a dimly lit basement by themselves and watch hot, sexy teen movies. Like, not a great idea. Well, depending on how you think about it, because I don't know. It's hard to really. I don't like to reduce the autonomy of anybody, but when I had an official girlfriend, they were into it. But if I didn't have that official girlfriend, if we weren't officially dating, if I just had a crush on somebody, then it didn't matter. It wasn't a thing. That there was no interest in it. Anytime I was feeling feelings that they'd already heard about, it was just boring.
Could you imagine somebody doing that to a teenage girl?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that would explode. That teenage girl would go to the ends of the earth. 9 times out of 10, not all teenage girls, but most teenage girls would go to the ends of the earth to prove that their love for their crush was real.
Yeah.
And I wonder if this isn't a part of, the gender abuse, where boys just weren't given the feelings. They weren't given the validation for their feelings the same way a girl was.
Yeah. It's true. We weren't.
Your feelings were only real if a girl reciprocated them. Because that's basically what you said.
Right.
And that was the message that they sent you.
Well, yeah. For my mom, it always seemed like, give me grandkids or give me death. But anyway, so I think that people have, unless their parents were particularly abusive, a lot of people have the memory of their parents as, when you're a kid, your parents are like superheroes. They're the ones that you want around all the time. You wanted to be like one of your parents and whatever, like you found out about who they were.
Up until a certain age.
Yeah, but before that age, that certain age, it was just joy when you saw your parents, or fear if they were abusive. And I don't
or
remember.
Both sometimes.
I don't remember any of that. Like, I don't remember my dad being my hero, or thinking like I want to be as strong or as big or as smart or as anything as my dad.
I wonder, and I hope you don't mind me outing this, but I wonder if that has to do with being adopted.
Oh, I don't mind that. Yeah, hi, viewers, listeners, whatever. I'm also an adopted person, but yeah, it could be, but that's so hard to determine,
Yeah,
'Cause, like,
I know. It's like neglect.
It's something that happened before my mentality turned on.
Yep.
So it's hard to know what the effects of that kind of stuff is.
I also want to make sure that I say here, like, people can do abusive things and they can actually be abusers. And my favorite thing that nobody seems to agree with, or hardly anybody seems to agree with, is that people can change. I don't advocate that the abuse victim should stay with an abuser based on that information, but I do believe as a society it behooves us to prevent future victims, to acknowledge that abusers can change, and to work towards fixing that. And not all abusive people need all that much of a push. Like your parents, I don't know that they're abusive now.
Though not nearly as neglectful, because my sister needed more attention. Like but I know that you said that I needed the attention too, but I mean from society's perspective.
Right, yeah.
From society's perspective.
Well, between you and society, there wasn't an impetus.
Yes.
pushing them to give that
Right.
attention.
But my sister struggled in class and
Yeah.
in social situations, and even just physically. There were physical situations that my sister had to go through as well. So like, and several years between us. So there was a lot of things that made it to where like they had to kind of pay a lot more of attention to it, and they still failed in certain ways.
Yeah.
I don't blame them. I love my parents, but like, and we all fail in certain ways. None of us are going to be perfect parents, but like, yeah, it. I think they changed.
And I think that's really the difficulty with abusive parents, particularly because no matter what they do, they're still your parents.
Yeah, but we turned the episode on abuse into like abuse towards kids.
Yeah, I didn't mean to.
But we couldn't talk about every aspect of abuse. But I'm going to reiterate one more time. If you feel like you're in an abusive situation, if you feel like a partner, a loved one, a family member, a boss is taking advantage of you and abusing you in ways that is destroying your autonomy and you can't get out of it, please seek help. There's those freaking lines for a reason. Abuse victims can get assistance. Not everywhere, but if you're in a place that you can, please please do what you can to get that assistance. You don't deserve it.
Right. And I'll put those things in the description, different links.
Yeah. uh I'm kind of I think I'm spent.
Well, before we go, there was something that you and I had talked about yesterday that maybe just enough energy for you to stick around.
Okay.
Where you had mentioned that, oh, what was it? That when somebody says something that feels to me like they are intentionally trying to remove my autonomy, I get triggered.
Yes.
And I think, I mean, that's got to be a function of abuse.
Mm.
That is hands down one of the many myriad signs and symptoms of having been abused. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. I mean, I got to overcome that at some point because it's not doing me any favors now. But that kind of reactivity, um, I think some people live with it and don't realize what it is. They just think, oh, well, that's just me. That's just how I am. But your actions aren't you. Your
Mm.
responses aren't you.
Nope.
Those are things that your brain has determined are the best thing to do in a situation based on your experiences and your knowledge and your skills to some extent.
Sure.
But that's not who you are. And those things can change.
Mm-hmm.
So, conversely, even if people aren't in a situation where they're being abused, if you have if you have overreactive moments, and I don't mean that to diminish your feelings in those moments because I know how that can feel.
Right.
But that you can look back at and after the emotion has passed think, wow, that was more than was really necessary for what happened.
Or if you feel embarrassed by your previous actions, like
Right.
I could have done this differently.
That might be a sign that you have been abused and have symptoms of that abuse, called complex PTSD,
Mm.
or CPTSD for short. And that's worth looking into. And I mention this because it's not guaranteed, but if you have CPTSD, you are vulnerable to becoming abusive to others based on those triggers that cause that excessive response can start to become abusive towards other people.
Absolutely.
And I don't, as a person who has been abused and has been abusive myself, I don't believe people in that situation ever really want to become the bad guy. They just end up in that and don't know how to get out.
Right. They're really, at the end of the day, just trying to protect themselves.
Right.
Or sometimes even protect other people from themselves. I recently got into some conflict with a person that was triggered by people telling them that they were being emotionally manipulative.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, you can't say that your trigger is someone calling you emotionally manipulative, because that means that no one's allowed to say you're emotionally manipulative, which is
Right.
highly abusive.
But that could stem from somebody using that term against them in the past.
It
And
absolutely
that is
probably was.
definitely a CPTSD sort of thing where like
Exactly.
you need to get help and heal that. Otherwise, it's very likely that someone's going to come along and you're just going to get into like this rut of responding to a specific scenario with abusive behaviors. Because the reason why this happens is because there's a thing called abusive self-defense,
Mm.
where victims will respond to their abusers with the same abuse that has been done onto them, fighting fire with fire.
Sure.
And all the resources for victims teach you, don't feel bad about using abusive self-defense, because that's, you were a victim and that was something that you needed to do to cope with it. But what they don't tend to do is make that extra step and say, once you're out of the situation of with that abuser, you need to learn how to not use those.
Right.
Those were useful in the situation where you were coping with an abusive situation, an abusive person that may have been doing you real damage. But once you get out of that, you need to stop doing those. You need to find the ways to cope with reality and the world. And the world has abusive people.
Yep.
And the world has abusive behaviors in regular people. Everybody has abused somebody in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody is an abuser, because abusers are people who regularly go back to and get worse with their abusive behaviors
Okay.
to deal with life. But everybody has abusive behaviors. And so if you have a response to abuse by being abusive, you are really in danger of becoming an abuser yourself,
Right.
eventually.
Exactly. Yep. I understand. I agree. How are you feeling, Tam?
I'm feeling pretty okay. You look exhausted.
My God, am I?
I feel energized. This is like the big one. I could talk about this all day.
Well, this is one of the topics that you would like your life to address, I think.
Yeah, I don't know how, but
we'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
This was probably only going to be the first of probably many talking about different forms of abuse and vulnerability. I don't know if we necessarily talked much about vulnerability within this episode about abuse.
That's fair.
And I don't think I'm going to try and shoehorn some vulnerability speak here at the end.
No.
Abuse is a big, heavy subject, and so we did the best we could to initially address it. Feel free to add or subtract whatever you wish in the comments below if you'd like.
Hope you don't hate us after all of the things that we've said.
I'm sure it'll be fine. Anything else?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being here. Dear and sweet listener, we very much appreciate your presence and time and attention. I'm eternally mortal, and I hope you find smiles this day.
Excuse me. And I'm the Accidental Monster. You can find us both on medium.com. Or you can go to tamonsteralley.com and you can find the Discord stuff there. I'll put the links in the description. And until next time, follow yourself, always.